Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event, Social Media Tips and Tricks for Law Enforcement, from the Chief of Police at Dunwoody, Georgia, and respected author, Billy Grogan. Now, this is Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow for government technology. I see some folks from Kansas on the line. I'm also a former Kansas State Trooper, Salina cop, so shout out to my folks in Kansas. Look, I'm excited to serve as a moderator today for today's event. Just want to say thank you for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, just a couple brief housekeeping items. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to everybody within 48 hours. You can use this. Make sure you pass it along to your colleagues. It's designed to be interactive, so please, please, please hit that Q&A button down at the bottom. We love the Q&A. We'll have 10 minutes at the end reserved for that, so make sure you keep asking. Use that Q&A box down at the bottom left hand of the presentation panel. And also, at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to download the PDF slides, so make sure you do that by clicking on the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of your console. Also, during today, make sure that you share with LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Please use the hashtag GovTechLive, and we'll be able to track what you guys are saying. Make sure we give you guys a shout-out as well. So at the close of the webinar, there will be a brief survey about this presentation. We're very eager to hear what you folks have to say. This is how we make sure that we're delivering the right kind of content, compelling content. So stay with us for the entire webinar to complete the survey. But if you can't, make sure you click the red survey widget at the bottom of the screen. Launch the survey, otherwise it'll pop up when we're done. So at this time, disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any media players, Brian from On24 and our crack staff will help you with any technical questions. So folks, time to strap on and put those seatbelts on and get ready for an exciting next 60 minutes. So joining me today is going to be Billy Grogan, Chief of Police at Dunwoody, Georgia, and also Anil Chawla. He's the founder and CEO for ArchiveSocial. Always great when we get the founder of the company on with us. So here's what we're going to do real quick. I'm going to go through, here's the agenda. It's going to be me. I'm going to turn it over to the Chief, then we're going to turn it over to Anil, and then we're going to do live Q&A. But what I want to do real quick first, though, is introduce Dunwoody, Georgia to you. For some of you folks who don't know where it is, it's in Georgia. They do so well down there. They actually have their own bank, and because of that bank, that is actually the Chief's office, as you see down there. So he's gonna get me, because Chief and I know each other and some folks in common. But it's nice to have an office overlooking the city like that. However, a couple things you need to know about the South. That is not a shopping cart. That is a buggy. If you don't know the difference, well, then bless your heart. And if you ever say that you want Pepsi over Coke, that's an arrestable offense, I believe, down in Georgia. So that's kind of set the stage. So my name's Morgan Wright. Those are ones and zeros, and that's what it's about today, folks. This is about bits and bytes, and that's my name in binary. But the real reason that's important is because how you manage these bits and bytes are going to determine your success or failure in social media. So just real quick, social media by the numbers. We're going to talk about just three things here. The first thing we want to talk about, and it's a big thing, is the First Amendment. Social media, more than anything else, has raised the issues of First Amendment issues across the board, so we want to make sure that we address those issues between the Chief and Anil. You guys are going to hear some of the challenges and pitfalls dealing with social media. If you're not aware of them, you will have, I promise you, First Amendment issues. Second thing we want to talk about, it goes together like salt and pepper, is transparency and accountability. One of the surveys that the Center for Digital Government did and Government Technology did is we went out and we surveyed people on the use of social media and technology and spending all sorts of attitudes about government. The two things they expect out of their technology, whether it's body-worn cameras, in-car video, whatever it is, it's transparency and accountability. And those are two of the things you're going to see about how to address those in today's presentation. Now, the third thing, just like Sesame Street and the count, today the number is 3. So what are the 3 things I think that we're changing? Now it's about two of the first concepts are policy. Make sure you got a policy in place first. Make sure you understand what you want to do before you do it. Then you've got to put the proper training in place to get the right kind of behaviors so that people understand what the policy is and then they can follow it with the right behaviors. We're seeing all sorts of issues like that, folks. Law enforcement has been the victim of it, as well as companies, of data breaches, spear phishing, things like that. So policy and behavior are very important. Then and only then to deploy the technology to solve the other two problems. If you don't have a policy and you haven't trained your folks, technology will only compound those problems. And by the way, social media fail of the day comes from your favorite actress, Lindsay Lohan. Yes, hello, Facebook. This is actually Lindsay, as she tweeted that out from her Twitter page. So that being said, let's go to our first poll question. So what's your opinion on social media as a public record? If you folks will vote on this for us, we're going to show you the results here in just a few seconds. So do you guys think it's definitely a public record by law? It might be a record, but the activity is not worth retaining. you feel strongly it is not a public record, or you don't know. So is it definitely a record? Might be a record. It is not a record, or you don't know. So as we wait for those votes to come in, let me actually introduce our next speaker for you, Billy Grogan. He is the chief of police and a police executive with over 33 years of law enforcement experience. And I know from talking with him, like I said, we both have moved in a lot of the same circles. He's got a lot of knowledge about law enforcement best practices, having served in the CALEA accredited department and currently a chief of a department that is state certified. He's very comfortable analyzing complex problems, developing progressive solutions, and preparing comprehensive reports. So before I turn it over to you, Chief, let's see what the folks say. Everybody thinks it's definitely a public record by law. Overwhelmingly, 86%. Only 5% think it's not, and about 7% we're not sure. So, Chief, actually, I know that some of the issues you're going to raise are going to help kind of illuminate these issues. So, Chief, I turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Morgan, thank you very much. I'm extremely happy to be here today and have this discussion. Hopefully it'll be informative, and if it doesn't address some issues, then hopefully we can address those through the Q&A portion of the presentation. So today I'm going to focus a little bit and go through a brief presentation and kind of focus, although I'll talk about some different issues, I'm going to focus a little bit on really effective use of social media. So today I'm going to try to focus on a few things about, kind of what's the big benefit and how to use it effectively, and so we're gonna talk about that. So let's get started. So the first kind of reason that I think it's important to use social media is to communicate timely information. In today's society, where you have everything in the world going on and people have their smartphones, I think about 80 or 90% of the people accessing Facebook and Twitter are doing so on their mobile devices. And so when you have something going on, it's important to let the public know. And so, here's an example in Dunwoody where we were doing a pedestrian safety check and trying to educate people about some pedestrian safety. And so we posted something on Facebook and, got a good response as a result of it. Had a missing child, missing teenager, and was able to locate the teenager and keep everyone updated. And then another case where we had this missing person. It was an Alzheimer patient, and within about less than 10 minutes of us posting his photo on Facebook, the subject was located by someone who was going to work. And so this kind of information is really something that we didn't have just a few years ago. And so we're able to be able to do that and reach our community and actually make a difference by giving them this important information. The second thing is really to market our department. The society that we live in today, we need to get the good news out about what we're doing as an agency, what the officers or deputies are doing, troopers, and all of law enforcement. And so no one's better positioned to do that than us. Certainly it's not going to be done by someone else. So, here's an example from one of our local departments. They did the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge and was able to post a video and online and really received a lot of good accolades about the great things that they're doing trying to raise money. And then here's the Dunwoody Police Department, where we did the polar plunge this year for Special Olympics. We jumped into the frigid waters of Lake Lanier. When I say frigid, that's all relative. Here in Georgia, it was pretty frigid, but it was 60 degrees when we did this. And so I'm sure it wasn't as cold as it was in some places across the country where they jumped in the freezing water. But nevertheless, it's important that we we try to let people know about the good things that we're doing. Also, managing our reputation. As I mentioned previously, there is a general sense of across the country sometimes that we're under attack in our many communities across the country, and so literally our reputations are at stake sometimes, and the only thing being reported sometimes is by other people on social media is really negative things about the department. So that's why reputation management is extremely important. One of the things that we've noticed recently here in Dunwoody is when our police officers, we do things a little bit different than some agencies. We have a very decentralized approach to our social media. So we're a small department of 58 sworn officers and 10 civilians, and we have roughly 18 to 20 people that are allowed, that are on the social media team, that are allowed to post on social media. And what we found is our community really responds to police officers when they really share something personal or from their perspective, or they talk about the kind of work that they do or something that they've seen or something that they've experienced. The community really responds to those posts, and that's really only come about in the last year or two, but it's really solidified our relationship with the community and the positive image that we have as a result of our use of social media. And so there's a couple of examples I have here where one officer was just talking about sitting down for lunch and somebody said thank you and just how it made him feel. And that officer was just one of our patrol officers who decided he would like to help out with social media, and so he did that, and so it was quite interesting and something that we might not have experienced if we didn't have a decentralized approach. If we only had one or two people posting it, it never would have been posted. Here's another good example. One of our officers really felt impressed to go to the New York police officers when the two officers were executed in New York. And I think JetBlue offered free airfare for any police officer wanting to go to the funeral. He took them up on that and went up there, and as you can see, this post was shared or was reached 542,000 people. So it resonated with the community. Tons of positive comments about our officers, and so definitely using social media to manage our reputation is important. And then community engagement, really identifying and showing how we interact with the community, and that's extremely important because that's what it's all about. It's about us and our relationship with the community, and posts such as the one I'm showing here go a long ways toward doing that. We did a video during National Police Week. We talked about that a little bit, and we posted the Why I Wear the Badge video during this particular time, and received a lot of good comments from our community. Also, it's a great opportunity to bypass the media filter when you use social media. You're not reliant on them to tell the good story, because frankly they're not. The negative stories are the ones that seem to lead on the television and in the newspapers, and there's so much good things that go on at our departments, and you can't really talk about through a press release all the good things that a department does. That's just not possible. They don't have the time or the inclination, frankly, to really talk about those kind of things. So social media gives you an outlet, a path for you to talk about the good stories, the things that your staff is doing, the good arrests that are made, really the things that you do every single day that makes your agency special. I know that in our 7 years, we're only 7 years old, our police department, and in our 7 years, we've generated, I would, loosely estimate, hundreds of positive stories in print, radio, and television about our department and about the successes of some of our officers or some of the things that we've been involved in, all generated just as a result of social media, nothing else, because all the local TV stations, radio, news reporters, newspapers such as the Atlanta Journal-Constitution all follow the police department on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on all Instagram, everything. And so they're able to pick up these stories and report them. And many times that they certainly do. But certainly getting that information out there and being able to bypass the media filter is important. This was one that was done recently, talking about texting and driving, and normally that might not be a story that would be picked up by the media, but certainly we had a 479,000 people reach with that story, so it did make an impact in our community. And then we had a cold case, a homicide, double homicide that we were investigating, and this was actually before Facebook allowed direct uploads of their video to Facebook. And so we were having to post it on YouTube and then put the link on Facebook, which I don't recommend now. I would recommend putting the video directly on Facebook and on YouTube. But anyways, this was a video that we did about the double homicide to try to bring attention to this particular case, and so it got shared, I think, about 1,500 times or 1,500 views, and so it helped us. And even as a result of that, 11 Alive, one of our local TV stations, decided they were going to run a story, and probably if we'd have pitched it with a press release or something, they would not have done that. So definitely bypassing the media filter is important. Also providing a high level of transparency. That's kind of a buzzword that's talked about a lot. And, one of the things that we talk about all the time is that we're very transparent. Certainly we're not putting anything on social media that's going to give away officers' positions or put them in danger. We talk about incidents usually after they happen, unless it's something that the public needs to know about, when the event's going on. But when you put the information out on social media about what's going on at your agency and what you're doing, that provides some comfort to the community and really gives them kind of an inside look at what you're doing and provides that level of transparency that I think is important for any police department today. And then communicating in a crisis. Any type of crisis that an agency goes through today, you almost have to deploy social media at the same time. And this is certainly usually done through the public information officers, but depending on the size of your agency, it may just be, someone, a supervisor or whoever it happens to be. But that's extremely important. If you've got a homicide scene or something going on and you can put information out, and, if you've got a critical incident, it's even more important. As an example, the Boston Police Department, this is one of the best examples of using social media during a crisis, and Twitter is a great tool for that, and they use that exceptionally during the Boston bombing event. Here's just a couple of examples, but they really kept and the key is they didn't wait for a crisis to happen before they activated a social media account and began using it. They were already on social media, and I can't remember, I've heard the number, but I think they added about 300,000 or 400,000 people as followers on Twitter during this event. But they used it they were the go-to location for information. So here's one that said, despite reports to the contrary, there has not been an arrest that was due to inaccurate information being released by the media. And then, the media was also, and our people were posting information about the tactical positions of police officers, and they were showing that on TV. And, they had no idea where the bombers were. And so that was an important thing that was pushed out by Boston PD and, of course, the capture. There were a lot of tweets in between there, but you get the point. It can be, if used correctly, it can be important. And we made a tactical mistake one time because we talked about that, and we had a snow event here a couple of years ago, and we were so overwhelmed with dealing with the calls and the stranded people, and it was like y'all may laugh, but it was like 3 inches of snow, but which was a lot for us because we don't have a lot of snow plows in Georgia. Anyways, it was pretty bad, and we focused more on trying to help people, and we really let that go. And we had some people say, hey, I thought y'all were going to be on social media when we needed you, and so we kind of learned a lesson from that. And then all of this, all the things like this that you do really strengthens your relationship with the community. And I mean, that's really the benefit. It's not to push the information out. It's not to be seen. It's not to be on social media and be funny. Humor is a great thing if used properly, but that's not the reason why we do it. The reason is because it builds and strengthens our relationship with the community. I look at social media really as an extension of community policing, and probably a lot of departments have citizen police academies, and people can ride along and things like that. But only a few people can take advantage of that, just because from a numbers standpoint, there's only so many citizen police academies you have, and only so many people are allowed in the classes. With social media, you can reach exponentially more people in your community and have a greater impact. And so I think that's it's extremely important, and social media can reinforce that positive relationship you have with the community. Here's just a quick example. This happens every day, but we post something, and here's the comments. Love me some Dunwoody PD. Law enforcement officers are wonderful servants to our communities, and so on and so forth. It happens, and that's great feedback. We try to share that with our staff so that they'll get that feedback and understand how important what we do is to our community. And then I want to just touch on this real quick about record keeping. And there's a lot of legal implications as a result of social media use. Certainly, a department should have a really good policy that deals with employee use, both on duty and off duty. Also, a process in place to retain the records that you're posting, because it's extremely important in case something's questioned. And I can tell you, going back and looking on some social media that happened 2 years ago that you posted is difficult and sometimes almost impossible to find these posts or comments that were made. And so I think that's important. Also, sometimes the posts that we make disappear, and so I think it's important to have those. As far as also from a legal standpoint, it's great to have a terms of use. So like on your Facebook page, outline exactly the, things that you, the rules for people engaging on your social media. And, you have to be respectful of people's First Amendment rights, but they're not just allowed to say anything. And so having a good terms of use is important so that you can respect their First Amendment rights, but your staff, that admins that work the page, will have the guidance from you as agency leaders to be able to know when they should and shouldn't take a post down. And so I think that's extremely important. And then lastly, I wanted to just share this with you. If you don't think social media makes a difference in how people think about you, check this out. This was an email that was sent in, and it says, I just wanted to send a little note and let you know how much I appreciate you and your team. Brave people don't come around every day, and from what I see on Dunwoody PD Facebook and in the news, you have some brave and wonderful people working at the precinct. So a lot of this lady's opinion in large part came because of what we post on our Facebook page. So I think that's an important lesson for all of us. I do have a couple of books out. If you're interested, you can go to lesmbooks.com, one on Twitter and one with 33 social media tips, tricks, and shortcuts. And you can always check me out at Chief Grogan on Twitter and at LESMChief. And I'll look forward to answering any questions that you've submitted.
Well, Chief, great job, man. That's a lot of information. And look, that's great work, too. And I tell you, being in former law enforcement 18 years, before there was no social media, and you've seen it too, it's great to see this kind of mechanism out there to where you can really connect with the community. Great job on that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask our next poll question before we introduce our next speaker. So because this is going to give us a real good sense of what's going on. So how is your agency currently retaining records of social media? We talked about, do you believe it's a record? 86% of you said it was. So are you not retaining your records for your own records, and you rely simply on the networks? Do you take manual captures like screenshots or copy and paste? Do you use a personal backup tool like Backupify or SocialSafe? Do you have an automated solution for archiving, or are you already a happy ArchiveSocial? So are you retaining them? Do you take manual captures, a personal backup, an automated solution, or do you use ArchiveSocial? So now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Anil Chawla. Anil is the CEO and founder of ArchiveSocial. They're a civic tech company that specializes in archiving social media, just what the chief talked about for public records requirements. ArchiveSocial partnered with the state of North Carolina in 2010 to launch the world's first open interactive archive of social media. Since then, ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of government entities, such as Fort Lauderdale Police Department, Mountain View PD, Chicago PD, and the big boys, the largest law firm in the world, the U.S. Department of Justice, to ensure long-term transparency for government social media communications. They were selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, and they were recognized as a 2014 Cool Vendor in Government by the leading analyst firm Gartner. So, Anil, let's see what those results showed. Wow, 40% are not retaining records, 25% just take manual screenshots, 12% only use a personal backup tool, 8% use an automated solution, and 12%, Anil, are happy ArchiveSocial customers. That sounds like that's a great lead-in for you.
Morgan, it absolutely is. It's a real pleasure and privilege to participate in this conversation today. We've got a number of notable law enforcement agencies participating across the country, and of course, a real honor to have Chief Billy Grogan here. What we often talk about, you hear this from a lot of talking heads in the space, including myself, we hear that social media can transform the way that government agencies serve the public. Chief Grogan, I want to thank you for sharing some very, very specific examples of exactly how that happens, how you can solicit crime tips, how you can engage the citizenry, build their trust, how you can create that connection for when a crisis may occur. All really, really great examples of why social media matters. And of course, the transparency is a key concern for all of us. Now, in full transparency, I want to share with all of you that my network just went out. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of help here moving through the slide deck. So I appreciate those are the folks on On24 to help me out here. I actually want to move to my agenda slide and talk about what I'm here to do today in this presentation. Chief Grogan has highlighted the benefits of social media. They are undeniable. But there's this other side of social media that has often gotten in the way. It's the legal side. It's the policy side. We get a lot of good tips out of Chief Grogan on how to address those issues. I'm going to deep dive a little bit more. I want to survey some of the real-life examples and case studies that we've encountered in our customer base, we've seen in the news, talk about the importance of social media as a record, and also talk to you about record keeping. We just did this survey and saw that the vast majority of agencies still do not have any kind of record keeping in place like you do for your email. Social media is that next new hurdle. You've got to figure out how to keep records. So my goal ultimately in this presentation is to build a case to you that this is something that you should think about today in your agency, and I'm going to provide you a variety of options based on your own environment and budget and your needs of how you might keep records. We'll start simple and get more sophisticated. If my network comes back, I'll try to provide a demonstration, but regardless, I want to arm you with those resources of how you can tackle that legal risk on the need to have records. And of course, we're here to answer your questions. So throughout my presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to address those at the end. Now, before I dive into the legal case studies and the record keeping, I'm going to take the next slide here. And the slide title is, Does Facebook Have Your Data? The vast majority of you indicated that today you're relying on Facebook and Twitter to have your records. So we at ArchiveSocial decided to conduct a study. We actually sampled 400 of our government customers the month of January 2016, so it's really fresh, it's hot off the press. And what we found is that nearly 8,000 records were deleted off of Facebook in that time period. We actually have the technology to detect that and record it for our customers. 8,000 records, 7,790 to be exact, out of those 400 customers had data that was deleted off of Facebook either intentionally or unintentionally. Could have been the staff of the agency. More likely it was a citizen deleting what they said. That's how much disappeared. Out of the 400 customers we sampled, nearly 70%, 281, had at least one record lost. Again, these customers had no idea on their own out of what Facebook tells you. This data is gone. It just goes away. It's deleted because someone can click delete and it's gone. This is what happened. And so really eye-opening that this information is not there to stay on Facebook and Twitter. There are no guarantees the social network provides that the information is going to be there. So when we talk about record keeping and the underlying reasons for having records, come back to this information and think about how much of that data you can expect to be there a month from now, 6 months from now, 3 years from now. With that, I'm going to kick off a discussion on why keep records in the first place. Fundamentally, every state in the United States, we'll go to this next slide and talk about the public records issue, and we can actually skip to the slide after that on Georgia's Open Records Act. Every state in this country has a law about open records or public records. And the laws are generally the same. They all come out of the Freedom of Information Act that was created at the federal level in the 70s. And essentially, the laws talk about how it's the nature of the content that matters, not the physical form, in order to decide whether something is a record or not. In Georgia, they've actually spelled out that any computer-generated information can contain public record, and a public record is something that is maintained or received by an agency in the performance of any kind of service or function. So anything that really corresponds to the business of your agency in any format, computer-based or not, could be a public record. Certainly social media meets that definition, and that's been validated across the country by state archivists and secretaries in many, many states. And this is no different probably in your state, and certainly you want to check with your local authorities on this, but this is something that's been validated across dozens of states now in the United States. I actually have control back of my interface. I'm back online, so I'm going to take control of the presentation and move forward. That's the academic version of the law. The real question is, what actually makes social media a record? And Morgan, I just want to check in here. Are folks able to hear me?
Yes, Anil. Yeah, we just had a little bit of problem, I think, on your network, but where the complaint we're getting is that you're just a little, or you're too hard to hear. So if you can talk louder or get closer to the mic.
Okay. Is this a bit better?
Sounds much better.
Okay, great. And our network just came back, so apologies, folks, for that inconvenience. Just talked about social media as a public record by definition. Now we want to look at the reality. And one thing I want to say up front is that not everything on social media is a record, but social media can certainly create records. And I've got a few examples on the slide here. Starting at the top left, Chief Grogan highlighted one of the best examples with the Boston Marathon bombings, how the Boston PD used social media throughout that incident to inform the public. Much of that information was only on social media. It was a unique record. It was critically important during that emergency to inform people. Certainly that created records. And we see that time and time again, most recently with the tragic incidents in San Bernardino, how SB County used Twitter to notify folks of the active shooter. That's coming out on Twitter. It's the best way to get the information out, but it's a unique record. It does need to be maintained. Now, on the bottom left, there's an example that is not as prominent. This is not national news, but this is happening in jurisdictions across the country. In fact, city of Durham is where we live. This is where ArchiveSocial is based. It's our hometown. And 911 became unavailable for a certain set of the general public. And Twitter was really the only way to get the information out to people in an effective fashion, that 911 was down, and here's the alternate way to get to 911. Now, outside of emergencies and public safety, which is obviously a huge aspect of this and a huge area of concern, there are other reasons why, other situations in which social media can create records, and you should be thinking about them. In the top right, you may have seen this really unfortunate incident called the duct tape dog incident, where a woman duct taped her dog's mouth, thought that was funny for some reason, and put that on social media and tagged herself as being in the city of South Daytona. She actually wasn't in the city, but the city of South Daytona was immediately hammered on Facebook about this incident. Citizens were outraged, asking why the police department wasn't out there finding this person. The city did a phenomenal job getting involved with the situation, informing the public, and ultimately tracking down this woman who was in a different state. But this was a crisis, and certainly there was a lot of controversy. A lot of upset citizens could potentially lead to public records requests and incidents down the road. And you do want to have record keeping during these viral outcries. And then finally, in the bottom right, day in and day out, agencies are performing customer service. And we'll see an example of this later on. but this is coming out of the Austin Code Department, where on social media, if you can, you want to be able to answer people's questions. They're asking you a question on that medium. Try to get back to them, even if it's directing them somewhere else. These conversations are happening and oftentimes generating new records. So the next question is, if these records are being generated, who's asking for them? Well, one example I have for you is from the Seattle PD. This is from about 2 years ago, where a citizen was following the different tweets by beat feeds that the Seattle PD has, which is a really awesome program to get information out about police incidents. But the citizen felt that perhaps sometimes the feed was delayed or missing information. He wanted to know if he could rely on these feeds. And so we started tweeting to Seattle PD and ultimately said, hey, I have the archives of your Twitter feeds for each beat. Please consider this a Public Records Act request. So essentially, he made a public records request for social media, using social media. It's a real sign of the times. And Seattle PD said, okay, you need to submit this records request online on our website, but this is a valid request, and we'll get back to you in a few weeks. So citizens do care about this information. They know they can't necessarily trust what's live on Twitter and Facebook, and they're going to ask you for it, and they do. Now, they might not ask you for social media specifically, though. And what we're seeing from the agencies we work with is that oftentimes public records requests are general in terms of the kind of content, the kind of physical content they're looking for. They really care about the topic. So you might get a request that says any and all documents, all notifications of the street closure, all emails and communications. And if you look at these requests, they certainly include social media if you used Facebook and Twitter or other channels to communicate on that topic. And you want to be complete in your fulfillment of that request. So let's skip ahead and look at a few case studies where record keeping has played an important role or could play an important role. The first I'll start with is a situation that many of you may be aware of. It was national news where the Honolulu PD was receiving commentary on a controversial issue and decided to remove content. It was related to gun rights and gun ownership. Decided to remove some content. The folks who had posted that were upset about it and ultimately filed a lawsuit saying they have a First Amendment right. Now, as Chief Grogan said, we all believe, industry standard belief here, this hasn't been tested in courts, but the industry standard belief is that government agencies do have the right to moderate content, but you have to have a really clear policy on when and how you're going to moderate, and you have to do it based not on opinion, but based on those specific rules. Is it profane? Is it off-topic? Is it offensive? And you have to be consistent. In this case, unfortunately, this didn't get settled one way or another by the courts. The PD in the city ended up paying for the attorney's fees to settle the case. But what it highlighted is that when you remove content from social media, it could come back to you later. And if you don't have any kind of record keeping, there's really no way to tell your side of the story without that kind of record keeping. So many agencies moderate and remove content. You need to have records if you do that in case it comes back. In our specific customer base, we have a few situations that, again, have not been national news, but they're really interesting, and they underscore the need to have record keeping so that you can continue to benefit from social media the way that Dunwoody PD does. The first incident was out of South Florida with the police department trying to do the right thing and inform the public of a company that might be a scam. They found this out from a local law firm and put this on the Facebook page. And, of course, as you might imagine, the company didn't agree. So the company got upset, asked them to remove those postings, which the police department did, and then the company came back and said, actually, we're going to file a lawsuit, just so you know, for the discovery request. We're going to ask you for every mention of us being a scam, which, of course, would include the content on Facebook that was already removed. Now, this is an unfortunate circumstance that needs to be played out in the courts, but when a discovery request comes in for content that you should have, it's in your best interest to have it. So record keeping is critical here, and of course this customer of ours had record keeping in place, was able to at least satisfy that discovery request and not start off on the wrong foot. Across the country, Santa Barbara PD had an incident where the city conducts gun buyback programs, and as part of, again, doing their job, the police department helps fulfill these events. And gun buyback, of course, is a controversial issue. And shortly after one of the events, the NRA actually came and issued a public information request for all communications related to the gun buyback. And Facebook was a mess because it's a controversial issue. Unfortunately, this police department had started a free trial of our software 3 weeks before the NRA came with the request and was able to produce that content. But without some kind of record-keeping approach, as I'm going to discuss, it would have been really difficult for them to fulfill that request, and nothing else came out of it, which is a good thing. Now, on the other side of the country, back up in the Northeast, Vineland PD This is an agency that was told by their attorney that because of concerns about First Amendment and negativity, that they were going to put a process in place to make sure no comments would show up on their Facebook page, that effectively all comments would become hidden, and they would just use Facebook in a one-way fashion. Well, citizens who were commenting were realizing that their comments were not showing up on Facebook, and ultimately one citizen said, I'm going to ask you to give me every comment that should have showed up on Facebook that you have been hiding, and I'm going to do this every month. And the citizen actually then went through with that and issued a public records request once a month asking for all content that was being hidden from Facebook. And this is something that bogged down one of the officers in the agency. He had to go through some screenshots and produce this, and he did it once a month. And of course, at that point, he went and found some archiving technology to help him out. Again, this is the kind of stuff that's really, really frustrating. We don't want that to get in the way of social media for all the reasons we've talked about. Social media is a huge benefit to you and the public, and we just want to minimize this risk and get it out of your way. And the last example I'll talk about is in the city of San Marcos, Texas. As many of you know, Central Texas experienced flooding not once but twice last year, and having record keeping and an archive in place proved critical for two reasons. One was for being able to respond to records requests. As you know, records requests will come in after a natural disaster. And two, for helping the communications team analyze the content and reflect back on what was being said on the common hashtags that they were using to understand what they might do the second time around. In fact, they were able to improve the second time around by looking at that historical content. On a separate note, San Marcos also experienced a website hacking that brought down their website for 4 days. And when the FBI got involved, the FBI went to the police department, and the police department said, well, there was this set of social media postings from somebody who was threatening us, but we removed those postings, and we don't think we have them anymore. And it turned out that because San Marcos was archiving, the communications director was able to step in and say, oh, wait a minute, guys, we've actually been archiving your social media. We do have records of those communications from this hacker, and they were able to provide those records to the FBI to assist in the investigation. So again, record keeping plays out in a lot of different ways. It's critical to have something in place. And for that reason, I'm going to transition and deliver on what I promised, which is a handful of different record-keeping approaches for your agency based on your budget and your current situation. I'm going to start with the most basic and build from there. The one thing I'm going to say again is you cannot rely on Facebook and Twitter. We already saw the data that we conducted, but this is something that's common throughout the industry, is that Facebook and Twitter do not have any kind of verbiage or legal guarantee that they will retain this content for you. So you do need to take this into your own hands. The first way you might do that is by manually taking screenshots. This is something that you should do if you're doing nothing at all, especially if you're going to remove content. Go ahead and take a screenshot of it before you remove it, or you see something that you think might become problematic, go ahead and take a screenshot. Some record is better than no record. The thing to know about screenshotting is that it is a very low fidelity record. It only has the content that you see on the screen. There's this issue of technical metadata. I won't go into it too much, but what you see on the screen is not the full record. So a 140-character tweet is not the full record of a tweet. A tweet actually has more than 2,000 characters of metadata, which is data that explains the tweet and talks about the user IDs, the location information, what Twitter client was used to post it. That's the full record. Screenshotting is not going to get you the full record, so it's important to think about what a real record is. And ultimately, while screenshotting might be free, to start with, over time, how do you go back and search hundreds upon hundreds of screenshots? How many hours are you invested taking screenshots? And if you go to court and somebody tries to dispute a screenshot you took, how well will that record stand up in court when today, in this day and age, anybody can Photoshop anything? Things to think about. So strongly recommend starting there if you have nothing, but thinking about some kind of automated approach that's more reliable. And the first place you might go to from a budget standpoint is looking at some of the low-cost backup tools out there. Tools like Backupify, it's about $100 a month. Social Safe, which is a tool that'll back up to your personal computer, but then you have to figure out how you're going to back that up. These are ways they'll at least do it for you in an automated fashion and get you somewhere very, very cheap, inexpensive to start with. Again, this is something that I would recommend if you're looking for just some option to get started and you can't go all the way with what you need. Backup tools are not meant for record keeping. They're not meant for archiving, so they do not provide the kind of context you need to make sense of your records. They do not provide sophisticated search functionality. They're really not meant for government agencies to be protected in legal situations. They're meant for individuals and consumers to have some copy of their information. But it's worth trying out, again, based on your budget. Very inexpensive. What I would strongly urge you to do is think about archiving. And of course, we have an archiving technology, but we're not the only ones. And as all of you archive your email, inevitably you will need to archive your social media. Now, there is something to look out for with social media, and it's this notion of all-in-one. Most vendors that provide archiving solutions come from archiving some other content. Perhaps they're really good at archiving email. Perhaps they're really good at archiving websites. And now they're archiving social media, and that's great. You should evaluate them. But here's some things to think about when you look at these vendors. How are they treating the data? Are they just converting social media into an email format? Are they web scraping and not getting the authentic information that has the metadata? How are they treating that data? Data conversion and data loss is a huge issue. There's actually a lawsuit out there right now with one of the vendors that was converting some data with email from its customer base because the customers were in a legal situation and got in trouble for not having authentic records. So you want to go with the vendor that's going to have social media in its purest, most authentic format. And then ultimately, social media is a living, breathing animal, unlike email, unlike a website that's fairly static. So you want a solution that's capturing the conversations, and then years from now, if you need to pull that conversation up, you can make sense of it and reconstruct it and not have to piece it together yourself. And ultimately, a solution has to be able to get this information out for you. And that's ultimately what takes me to my 4 criteria for an ideal social media archiving solution. These are the criteria that I'd encourage all of you to evaluate as you think about your record-keeping approach. How quickly can you get the data off of Facebook and Twitter in your hands? Because as I explained earlier, the data is being deleted, it's being lost. How comprehensive is your capture? With social media, this is being broadcast in public. It's not one-to-one like email. And so if you don't have the records, it's still very likely someone else could have some record. Maybe it's a screenshot. So it's in your best interest to have complete records with metadata. Authenticity, ultimately from a legal standpoint, will that record hold up in court? Can you prove it? And then context, again, social media is a rich medium. You may be able to back up some information from a week ago and parse through it, but go back to a data dump from 2 years ago, and does your tool really help you put that information together? Can you reconstruct a Facebook feed? Can you replay a Twitter timeline in an easy fashion, in a confident fashion to know that you have exactly what you need to have to fulfill your requirements? That's ultimately what you need to think about, these 4 criteria. And so with the time remaining, and my network participating in this endeavor, I'm going to try to give you a quick demonstration of Dunwoody's archive as Chief Grogan is a thought leader in the space. He is employing record-keeping technology. I'm going to give you an example of an archiving solution. Certainly there are other options out there for us to look at. And I'm going to take you just to that demonstration. And while that's loading, I'm going to get my information on the screen. One thing I do want to touch on briefly, just because it was a really important thing that Chief Grogan brought up, is that social media is about your brand. It's about that public perception. It's about understanding how your public is viewing you. And an archive can play into that. Historically, archives are things that you turn on in the background and you don't think about. IT might handle it. But with social media is really a frontline communication. And so with the social media archive, you can actually run metrics on sentiment to understand how positive or negative your citizens are responding to your content. You might turn on alerting so that you can find out when people are posting problematic content on your page, or maybe somebody accidentally reveals their government ID or their social security number. You can even just turn on reporting so that you can share what's happening on social media with the stakeholders in your organization. And that's something that we're looking at as an archiving company, is how do we get that value of the archive out to you as a communicator. So with that, there's my contact info, and as promised, I'm going to bring up a screen share and do a brief presentation here so you can see what a real archive looks like, and then we'll embrace your questions. And hopefully this is showing up. I'm logged into the archive for the city of Dunwoody PD. I do appreciate the opportunity to show this archive as an example of archiving technology. With social media being in the cloud, this is something that you can set up in less than 30 minutes. It's very inexpensive, very easy to get going, and it automatically can pull information from the social networks continuously throughout the day while you're using social media. So it's really hands-off. It does it automatically. What I'm going to focus on, though, are really 2 key criteria, that authenticity and that context. And I'm going to start with a search. With any record-keeping solution you have, you should be thinking about how it's going to help you find content. With social media, just like anything else, you want to be able to drill down to date ranges. You want to be able to search the entire archive as well as specific parts of it. So you might want to search all of the different social networks you work with, Or you might say, well, what I'm really interested in right now is just my Facebook posts on my timeline. Yeah, you might want to search your department. You may be doing this in conjunction with the rest of your city. So having that granularity, of course, is important. And then when you're dealing with citizens, sometimes you need to find contact that is from a particular individual or directed to a particular individual. Having that kind of power is really helpful. But what I want to focus on here is that needle in the haystack problem that you have inevitably when you're looking for records. So I'm going to run a wildcard search, and just to show you the archive, we've got more than 55,000 social media records for the City of Dunwoody Police Department. And if you're looking for that needle in the haystack, think about the archiving tool, how it reconstructs that information for you and helps you find it. In our case, what we can do is drill down. We can drill down by a variety of criteria, but for this example, let's drill down and look at comments on your Facebook timeline. So we'll click on that and real-time drill down, and perhaps what we'll do is go to a particular month. Let's say we're looking through this list. So let's go down to November of 2014, and now we've gone from 55,000 records to 600. And let's say you find the comment you're looking for. This is where context comes in. How do you make sense of that one comment on its own? Well, the archiving technology ideally will put it all together for you and give you that full conversation with all the comments. If there were more comments here, allow you to expand that out and view that information and make sense of it. That's what you're looking for. You can see that happening here in this other example. The technology really needs to work for you. Once you've found what you're looking for, being able to then turn that into a PDF or some other format and getting it into the hands of the requester or your attorney, making that really, really seamless so that you can, again, focus on using social media to benefit your agency and benefit the citizens. And that's what archiving is all about, getting the risk out of the way. And so with that, that's my demonstration. I know we've got lots of questions coming in, so back to you, Morgan.
Hey, Anil, thanks a lot. And I'll tell you, let's make sure that we've got everybody here with us right now. So there's Anil's information if you guys have anything. So, hey, folks, before we get started here, just make sure we're getting close to the end. We're going to do some Q&A. In 48 hours, we're going to provide everybody with a link to the recording. Make sure you share it. This is critical information. Make sure you keep those questions coming in. And, of course, do the survey at the end. You can download the slides if you want to. So, look, we've got a few questions in here. And, Chief, a couple of these are for you. So let me get the first one. It's from Tom Collins, Austintown Police Department. Tom asks, he goes, the positive feedback from the community is a great morale booster, but how do you handle the person or persons who post negative or sarcastic comments about the department or officers? The comments may not contain profanity, but certainly are not pleasant. That's a great question. What do you do when it doesn't violate your terms of service, but it's a hate tweet?
Well, that's an excellent question, and so here's kind of how we handle it, and here's what I recommend. If somebody is critical of the department or otherwise, says something negative about the department, usually what we'll do is we'll post something, a reply to that, so that everyone can see, and we'll say something like, "So sorry that you're dissatisfied with the department. Can you contact Sergeant Espinoza at this number, and we'd be glad to talk to you about it." And so that's one way of handling it. Usually they won't call in typically. The second thing that sometimes happens when you have on your Facebook page is that usually all the supporters that you have will actually get on the page and start commenting back and telling the person, go away. That's not how the police department is. Yeah. And so we get a little bit of that peer pressure, so to speak, that comes in. But I found that if it's just one of the casual drive-bys, so to speak, that stops by and wants to say something negative, that if you you don't just ignore it, but you respond to it and try to demonstrate to everyone that sees that you're reaching out to them, that you're not returning in kind. So you don't ever want to get into an argument with people on social media, because you're never going to win that one. So if they're ugly, don't be ugly back, and that sort of thing. So reaching out, but that really doesn't address, and there's no really good way to address some of these, but sometimes you just get, because of an incident or something happened, you might get a bunch of haters on there that just flood your social media channels. And this has happened across the country in a few places. And I know that there's I think it was I might be wrong about this, but I think it was the San Diego County Sheriff's Office that just took down their Facebook page because of the negative comments that were on there, and which I certainly don't recommend that. But I think being straightforward, trying to address it with them, as best you can. Some people you can't, you're not going to please. But one thing that's important, I think, to have in your terms of service or your terms of use for your Facebook page in particular is that something about the comments being on topic. And so when they're off topic, that's usually when people, you'll be talking about this, great thing, Citizen Police Academy graduation or something, and then somebody wants to talk about some other subject, like, you're stopping people over here for speeding and writing them tickets for no reason, and, they say ugly things about that. Well, that's not really on topic. So sometimes if you have a good policy, you can kind of get away by not deleting. I would never recommend deleting it, but hiding those kind of posts because they're off topic.
No, absolutely, and good point. So that whole thing, dig your well before you're thirsty, build that reservoir of goodwill before you need it, and then the folks will come to your defense. So, hey, a couple other things, too. We've got a lot more questions coming in, so folks, keep them coming in. So, Anil, this one's kind of for you and then also for the chief. Tom Bennett from Walla Walla Police Department asks, he says, look, what about the laws requiring archiving of website data, not just the social media, but the website? Anil, have you run across, some of those same issues when you're looking at social media, or are you seeing now that people are just using the web kind of as a static thing and everything dynamic is over on social media?
Well, Tim, first of all, I'm excited that we've had the opportunity to partner with Walla Walla on this issue, and this is a really good question in terms of record keeping in general. Does it apply to websites, social media? It does apply to any content, regardless of physical form, so websites are certainly included with that. Our focus at ArchiveSocial is on social media because the information is out of your control on Facebook and Twitter. But websites are important to have records in terms of it's important to have records of your website content. The interesting thing about websites is generally the website is in your control. It's on some server that your IT controls. So you could take regular backups if you're not doing too much of a dynamic update to your website. And there are some options out there for crawling your website, once a day, once a week, once a month. A little bit different than social media, but the requirement is fundamentally the same.
No, and that's, don't rely on Google either. They index a lot of things, right, but they don't capture everything. So, hey, we've got time for probably 2 to 3 more questions waiting to go on. So we've got one for you, Chief. We've got one for you, Anil, and then we're going to close out with kind of a quick round. So, Jeremy Warwick, I'm not sure where the police department is, or Warnick, it says, Chief, curious to know if you have officers. I'm sorry?
He's at the Cambridge Police Department.
Cambridge, all right, Cambridge. So he is curious to know if you have officers' resistance to being featured in your social media efforts, like being photographed, videoed, written about, and if so, how do you overcome that? I mean, obviously there's some undercover issues or, sensitive positions, but just in general, your patrol, your people out on the street, what kind of issues are you having and how do you overcome it?
Well, for us, we're a pretty small department. As I said, we have a total of 58 sworn officers, and we've been, since the department was formed, we've been engaged on social media. So we really haven't had that issue for the most part. I think on a couple of occasions we've had an officer who was at something and said, hey, I really prefer my picture not be shown, and we didn't show the picture. So we try to be sensitive to that, but unless somebody lets us know that, hey, this is an issue for me, if they're working and we're putting photos up and it's of an event or something going on, it gets put up, and it hasn't really been an issue for us. But I know that some departments have, especially the larger departments, have really struggled with this because some people are very sensitive about that, right. And I think you have to respect their rights or their wishes in that particular situation. You certainly don't want to force anybody to have their photo put up there if they don't want it.
Right, and no, look, absolutely. But again, it's one of those things you got to manage because you are a public agency. But hey, great answer. We just got time probably for one more here. So, yeah.
I was just going to mention something real quick, Morgan. A friend of mine with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in Colorado, she does their social media there, and as a new employee recently hired, And so she had some resistance along that line. And so what she did was actually met with the officer and talked to the officer and showed the officer, what kind of positive outcomes could happen because of the social media use, and won the officer over. So that's a good way to handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Neil, this last one is going to be for you. I'm going to combine two questions into one because it's one of the more popular questions we're getting. So Gina Miller from Umatilla County, I believe it is, says, for Mr. Chavla, how do we get more information on your services, which also ties in to a lot of questions. As you know, people like it. They want to know how it works. Then the last question is, how much does it cost? So I'm going to throw that softball in your court.
Certainly my favorite question. Basically, Gino, I've shared my contact info. I would love to just facilitate that conversation and get it going for you. You're welcome to email me directly, Anil, A-N-I-L, at ArchiveSocial.com. I can get that conversation going. We do also provide a host of information on our website, including our pricing. You can see the cost there. It's intended to be a discretionary spend for most agencies. You can actually even sign up and get this going within 30 minutes by yourself on our website if you're so inclined to do so. But we'd love to talk, and ultimately, whether you work with us or not, we are here to be a resource. That's why we've partnered with Government Technology on this webinar and many other things. Chief Grogan mentioned having a great policy. We've created a social media policy with Government Technology that we're happy to give to you, a comment moderation guide. We're happy to share that. No obligation. We want to be a resource to public agencies. All we do is work with government throughout the country. That is our focus, social media archiving for government, and try to provide a service, again, that's a discretionary spend, generally under $5,000 annual for any agency. No other fine print to that. Some agencies are even less expensive. If you have a large social media presence, it might be a little bit more expensive, but a low cost, easy to get going. And if we can help you mitigate risk and use social media to a greater degree, then please contact us and we'll do what we can.
Oh, hey, Chief, first of all, I want to say thank you for being on. Neil, same to you guys. We've run out of time. We still have more questions, but we want to be respectful of our 1-hour commitment. So, folks, we're going to wrap it up here. In closing, I just want to thank everybody for being on today. I want to thank you to ArchiveSocial, our corporate sponsor for this, and our partner in this, more importantly, our partner in this. And make sure that if you guys have any issues, make sure that you do that survey. We really need your feedback. Download the slides if you want them. Share this link with everybody. We want to thank everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another government technology event. Everybody have a great afternoon.